will be taking the lead on this, trying to find out who was flying the planes, whether they had in fact been turned away from their regular flights, and so on. So very little information.
David, we're going to have to cut you off. President Bush is speaking.
A moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary of Rod Page and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
Emotional President Bush there speaking in Sarasota, Florida, cutting short his stop there, saying that an apparent terrorist attack has occurred on U.S. soil. They're mentioning the 2 planes that have crashed into the World Trade Center this morning. He says a full-scale investigation is underway to hunt down those responsible for this, saying terrorism will not stand.
And Leon, on the heels of the president's remarks, CNN has learned that at least one of the planes involved in this hit on the World Trade Center was an American Airlines 767, a Boeing aircraft that took off from Boston. What happened to that airplane as it took off from Boston and how it ended up at the World Trade Center, our details we'll have to fill in as we go. But let's go ahead and bring in our David Ensor. David, you were saying before we interrupted you for the president's remarks.
Well, unfortunately, the amount of detail that the officials who are tracking this have is pretty sketchy at this point. But I was just saying that officials are calling this an act of terrorism. They're saying that's clearly what it is, clearly not an accident. And law enforcement agencies, the FBI and others, will be taking the lead on this, officials say. And clearly, obviously, they will first try to ascertain who did this. What nationality are they? What's behind this? That's really all I can say. There are several places around the government. There are groups of officials gathering and setting up crisis centers to try and deal with the flow of information on this, which, as you can imagine, is going to be considerable as the day progresses.
And so far, as far as we know, no one has been taking responsibility for this.
There have been no claims of responsibility, and U.S. intelligence officials say they had no warning of anything like this coming along.
All right, David Ensor, thank you for joining us on the phone. Once again, you can see that information at the bottom of your screen. 2 different planes have flown into the World Trade Center within the last hour. One plane was an American Airlines Boeing 767 from Boston. In terms of how many people were on board that plane and if it was forcibly taken from Boston into New York, we still have yet to learn.
We're joined now on the telephone by the former Federal Emergency Management Agency Director James Lee Witt. Director Witt, you're watching these pictures with us this morning. Your comments?
Well, it's just horrible. There's no doubt. I did see the one plane flying into the building. It's just unbelievable, something like this. But, you know, we've been for several years now, we've been working on terrorist-type events, and, and this is apparently one of those events that I do not know yet, but apparently it could be. And right now, I know I really feel for those families, but Richie and the New York Emergency Management, the state of New York, and I know they're very busy right now in the FBI and law enforcement, but this is one of those crisis management as well as consequence management situation that they're going to have to be dealing with.
You know, the first thing that calls to mind to many of us who have been here to cover these events was the World Trade Center bombing back in was it '96 when that bombing occurred?
Yes.
And you were director of FEMA at that particular time. Since then, has there been a plan put in place for something like this, to recover from this, or to go through the exercises necessary to get people out and to recover from it?
Well, they have a very good plan in place, and for even events, not as this. I don't think I don't know if they put a plan in place for airline crashing into it, but I know they take every scenario they could think of and try to deal with a plan that will help them respond in the most effective way. And we even practice airplanes flying into igloos, and at some of the arsenals around the United States. So you try to practice for everything you can think of and hope for the best, and that you can be able to respond and hope none of this happens. But
well, on that note, then, did you run any kinds of tests at all, or any kinds of, I don't know, theoretical tests or computer tests or anything on something like this?
We didn't. I'm not sure if New York City did. I'm sure they did. But you can't. How can you stop something like this without having anti-aircraft guns sitting on top of buildings?
Yeah.
You just can't. You can prepare the best you can be, and that's all you can do. But I'm sure that they've got everything in place and they always do an excellent job up there in New York.
Director James Lee Witt, former director of FEMA, we thank you very much for your time this morning. We may be talking with you later on.
As we continue our coverage, our Aaron Brown in New York City joining us now. Aaron, we can see over your left shoulder there the building still smoldering of the World Trade Center.
Well, it is a grotesque sight to look at from about 30 blocks away from where we are. For those of you just joining us, let's just briefly recap what we know. About an hour ago, about 8:45 Eastern Time, one plane crashed into the tower, the World Trade Center tower on the right, the first of those towers that you can see behind me. And then about a half hour later, a second plane crashed into the tower number 2. That's the one to the left, where the darker smoke is billowing out right now. We have reports, CNN has been told that one of the planes was an American Airlines 767 that had been hijacked from Boston. We don't know if that was the first or the second plane that hit the tower, but we do know that it was a 767 American Airlines jet. At least that's what CNN has been told by sources so far this morning. We also have reports of 1,000 injuries. That is unconfirmed, and we always remind you in moments like these that as these initial reports come in, it is very early. I can tell you, driving in, it is extraordinarily chaotic on the west side of New York. It is the kind of situation where numbers change, where situations change, but this is the information we have now, that there are at least 1,000 injuries, and we're working on that. As you can see, the smoke billowing out of the Trade Center. In Sarasota, Florida now, Major Garrett joins us. Major, what are you being told?
Hello. President Bush has notified, talked to Vice President Cheney. He has talked to the FBI Director, Robert Mueller, and he has also spoken with the Governor of New York, Governor Pataki, about this catastrophe. The President will convene a national security meeting upon his arrival back at Washington. Those are the 4 pieces of information we have gathered here in the moment since I just spoke to you on the telephone. The President, as we just saw a few moments ago, identifying this as an apparent act of terrorism against the United States, said there will be a full investigation. The entire apparatus of the United States government, FBI, national security, CIA, the Vice President, who you may remember was placed in charge of a domestic terrorism study group within the White House to monitor and develop plans to deal with a catastrophe of just this kind. All those parts of the government have been mobilized. The President is heading back to Washington very soon. Here's what the President said about this catastrophe at the Twin Towers in New York just a few moments ago here at a Sarasota elementary school.
Major, it's Aaron.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
The president was first notified about the situation in New York by National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. Then the second notification updating him with more details on the situation came from his chief of staff, Andrew Card, who's traveling with the president here in Sarasota. The day was supposed to talk about education reform, but the president is scrubbing all of those plans, marshaling all the resources of the federal government, talking with his aides as he can, and preparing to fly back to Washington to, again, as we said, convene a National Security Council meeting. Back to you.
Major, before you get away, and I apologize if I'm asking you to repeat something, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Do we know exactly where the president was when he was told?
He was just arriving here in Sarasota at Emma E. Booker Elementary School. He had taken an early morning jog this morning in Sarasota, had just arrived here with a presidential motorcade. Then the spectacular, horrific pictures began appearing on television sets here at the elementary school. The president received a telephone call from Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor. Then he received an update from his chief of staff, Andrew Card, traveling with him. Then it was made clear to the press, traveling with the president, he would make a statement. Shortly before that statement, he was actually sitting down with some children here at the elementary school, reading them a book. Reporters asked him if he knew about the situation of the Twin Towers. He nodded and said he would talk about it momentarily. In fact, he did. We just heard the president's statement declaring this an apparent act of terrorism. Yes, Aaron?
Let me interrupt you here. Senator Kennedy is speaking in Washington as, again, one of the planes was hijacked from Boston. Perhaps we can hear the senator now.
This morning, we underline the point that it is postponed. We are not going to see the business of America deferred because of terrorism, whether it's in education or in other area of public policy. We're looking forward to hearing from the First Lady on a subject matter which is of central concern to all families in this country, and because of her experience and her leadership, this committee and the Congress and the American people would have benefited greatly from her comments, and we will look forward to an early
Senator Ted Kennedy in Washington. Chris Plant, a CNN producer, is at the Pentagon, where there is a significant fire. Chris, you're on the phone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Tell me what you know.
Well, arriving at the Pentagon a short time ago, there was a huge plume of smoke which continues to rise from the west side of the Pentagon, over in the area where there is a helicopter landing zone. It's along Route 27 if you're looking at maps of the area. The building is currently being evacuated, and police and emergency units are, of course, responding from all around the building and from the local Arlington County Fire Department. The plume of smoke is enormous. It's a couple of hundred yards across. At its base, it is billowing into the sky, hundreds of yards. It's impossible for me to say from this side of the building whether the building itself is on fire or up in flames, or exactly what caused this. I did not hear an explosion, but there is certainly a very, very significant fire in this enormous office building on the west front. The building is being evacuated. The Defense Protective Service officers, the police force for the Pentagon, are on a very tight string right now. As I arrived, I was held at gunpoint.
Chris, yes. let me interrupt you for a second. Just hang on. Don't go anywhere. We're getting reports now that the White House is being evacuated as well. We don't know precisely what has caused that decision to be made, whether that is precautionary, whether something has happened at the White House. Again, the president is in Florida this morning, so the president is not in any danger, but the White House, of course, is fully operational, whether the president is there or not, and we have reports that the White House is being evacuated. Getting back to Chris in a moment, we also have reports now from Chris Plant on the scene that the Pentagon is being evacuated as well. All of this coming on the heels of a large fire at the Pentagon, and we can't tell you at this moment whether that fire is inside the Pentagon building itself or on the ground to the Pentagon. And these two planes that you can see behind us that hit the World Trade Center. That's Washington, the old executive office building, I believe, and you can see the plume of smoke behind it, which we will assume until we're told otherwise that that's the fire at the Pentagon. I believe that's correct. As you look now at Washington. So we've got a major fire at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon being evacuated, the White House being evacuated, and we don't know precisely the circumstances there, what caused that decision. And we have these two enormous explosions at the World Trade Center here in New York, where two planes slammed into the buildings. We are also getting reports now that there is a fire on the Mall in Washington, that part of the Capitol that runs essentially from the Capitol to the White House in kind of a straight line going up Washington, D.C., and we have reports of a fire there. What you're looking at now is Washington, at least if I can see the monitor in front of me. It's a little tricky from where we are, but that looks to me like the old executive office building, and then in back of it you see the large plume of smoke. Here in New York, sirens everywhere, people out on the streets staring at this grotesque scene of the World Trade Center buildings. It was in February of '93, if memory serves me correctly, that there was an attack, a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. Bomb exploded in the garage of the Trade Center on that day in February of '93. Here we are in the year 2001, and what appears to be deliberate attacks on the World Trade Center. And then we have these two reports out of Washington, the fire at the Pentagon. Chris Plante is still on the phone, I do believe. And we'll get to him in a second. Greta Van Susteren is at National Airport in Washington. Greta, what are you hearing?
I just got off my plane. I was headed to New York. Planes were stalled. I'm at National Airport on the parking lot. I heard a huge noise. I looked over in the direction of the Pentagon. There's a huge plume of smoke coming from that area. I can't verify it's the Pentagon because there are these buildings in the way. You see particles coming down in the air, some sort of white particles. I can't tell what that is. I'd heard a noise slightly before I'd seen the smoke. I don't know if it's an airplane, if it's a bomb, but it was certainly something, and obviously there's a terrific fire going on. The skies are clear here except for the tremendous amount of smoke that's coming from there. Lots of sirens from all different directions, and of course a lot of uncertainty here at National Airport.
Greta, thank you. I want to just again recap as we pick up small pieces of information along the way. Associated Press is reporting that it was a plane that crashed at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is being evacuated. There is a large fire there, and that is the smoke you see in the shot that you are looking at now. Whether that fire is in the building itself or outside, we have not yet confirmed. There is a fire on the Mall in Washington. The cause of the fire on the Mall in Washington, we cannot yet tell you. We can tell you that the White House has been evacuated, and we can tell you that two planes have crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. All of this began just a little more than an hour ago at about 8:45 Eastern Time. Chris Plante, tell me what you've learned since we last talked.
Well, in speaking to people here at the Pentagon as they're being evacuated from the building, I am told by several people that there was in fact an explosion. I was told by one witness, an Air Force enlisted, senior enlisted man, that he was outside when it occurred. He said that he saw a helicopter circle the building. He said that it appeared to be a U.S. military helicopter, and that it disappeared behind the building where the helicopter landing zone is, and that he then saw a fireball go into the sky. I'm attempting to make my way around to that side of the building in my car right now to see if I can get a better visual perspective on the scene on that side of the building. But I can tell you that security has certainly clamped down. The U.S. Park Police, another federal law enforcement department, has arrived in force on the scene. There's a Park Police helicopter overhead. Every car that arrives at the gate where I was located was being stopped by officers at gunpoint. Everyone is being forced out of their vehicles as they arrive at the Pentagon. It's a very tense situation, obviously, but initial reports from witnesses indicate that there was, in fact, a helicopter circling the building, contrary to what the AP reported, according to the witnesses I've spoken to anyway, and that this helicopter disappeared behind the building and that there was then an explosion.
That's about all I have from here.
Okay, let's do this, Chris. Why don't you continue reporting, and we'll pass along a couple of other things that we're picking up along the way. Trading at the New York Stock Exchange. The Stock Exchange, as many of you probably know, but some of you don't, is in that part of Lower Manhattan, not quite as far down as the Trade Center, but it is in that part of Lower Manhattan, and trading has been suspended there. Bridges and tunnels coming into New York have been closed. That will create a whole different set of problems. We are also being told that the FAA has suspended takeoffs and landings, and I want to make sure I get this right, guys, that in at all airports around the country. Air travel in this country has come to a halt this morning, as clearly people in government, police forces, fire departments are trying to figure out what exactly is going on. There are several now incidents that look, for all that we can tell, to be a major terrorist attack here in the United States. So all airports all across the country are closed. All bridges and tunnels coming into Manhattan are closed. The Pentagon has been evacuated, or is being evacuated. The White House is being evacuated. The president, who is in Sarasota today to make a speech on education, has spoken briefly to cameras and will shortly make his way back to Washington. They are checking out Air Force One now. Let's go to Atlanta. Chad Myers can talk to us a bit about the air traffic problems. Chad, are you there?
Aaron, yes, all of the airports across the country have been shut down. We started with Zone New York, which includes Islip, Newark, JFK, LaGuardia, all the way down to Philadelphia, and then IAH, Houston, and then San Francisco, and then LA. They were just falling like a deck of cards, and then all of a sudden the FAA just said, we're shutting down everything. All flights have been canceled for another 7 hours, which is about 5 o'clock Eastern time, and then we'll reignite there. We'll take a look what's going on after that. The probability of extension, as they call that, is high, which means even after 5 o'clock, the airports may still be shut down. We'll keep watching it for you here from Atlanta.
Chad, and if you don't know, just say you don't know. Can you recall a situation where every airport in the country had been shut down?
Absolutely not, except in wartime, of course, Aaron, and obviously this is not that. But with all the airports, as they were going down from west to east, we could see them, and then we could eventually see from New York, and then they canceled Boston, as we got the report that the first flight, or one of the possible hijack flights, did come out of Boston, and then it just started going down from there. But never, ever before have we ever seen all of the airports shut down like this, not this quickly.
Chad, thank you. Stay on this for a while. We'll get back to you. We know that many people are just joining us. We want to get everyone on the same page before we move on. So one more time, let's go through the sequence of events. At about 8:45 Eastern Time, a plane crashed into the foremost of those towers that are the World Trade Center. That's Air Force One you see in Florida, the president on board. Obviously extraordinary security around the plane before the president got on, and the president is heading back to Washington. A short time ago, the president made a statement. He said, terrorism against our nation will not stand. The government will hunt down those responsible. Mr. Bush said today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 planes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on the country. And we also have a report now that it was a plane that crashed into the Pentagon, and we have a large fire at the Pentagon. The Pentagon is being evacuated as we speak now. The White House has been evacuated as well. CNN's John King joins us on the phone. John.
Aaron, I'm standing in Lafayette Park directly across from the White House, perhaps about 200 yards from the White House residence itself. The Secret Service has pushed most people all the way back to the other side of the park, trying to avoid having that done to me at the moment. Just moments ago, they started slowly evacuating the White House about 30 minutes ago, and then in the last 5 minutes, people have come running out of the White House and the old Executive Office building, which is the office building right directly across from the White House. About 10 minutes ago, there was a white jet circling overhead. Now, you generally don't see planes in the area over the White House. That is restricted airspace. No reason to believe that this jet was there for any nefarious purposes, but the Secret Service was very concerned, pointing up at the jet in the sky. It is out of sight now, best we can tell, but they've evacuated the entire White House staff and the old executive office, as well as some townhouses that are government offices. Many of our viewers might know Blair House, where other international leaders stay when they are in Washington. That block of townhouses has been evacuated as well, and they are pushing us now back toward H Street, which is the next main street to the north from Pennsylvania Avenue across from the White House.
Okay, John, hang on one second. We're also getting reports at the Capitol, the Treasury building also being evacuated. John, is this evacuation from the White House, was it orderly? Did it seem panicky? How would you characterize it?
It started off as orderly, much like we get when there are occasional bomb scares near the White House, but then, again, in the last 10 minutes or so, the people who came out, the last several hundred I saw leaving the grounds, were told and ordered by the Secret Service to run. They were running through the gates. These are, of course, professionals in business suits. I'm also told that prior to that, and we don't know the current situation, that the Vice President and other administration officials on the scene were meeting in the White House Situation Room, which is in the basement of the White House. Whether they have stayed on the complex or not is unknown to us at this moment. I spoke to an administration official shortly after the President delivered his statement, who said obviously the operating assumption here is terrorism. The initial assumption, this official said, was that this had something to do, or at least they were looking into any possible connections with Osama bin Laden. The administration recently released a warning that they thought Osama bin Laden might strike out against U.S. targets.
Just to add, John, a bit to what you've been saying, we're getting a report from Associated Press now that the White House was evacuated after the Secret Service received what AP is describing as a credible, a credible threat of a terrorist attack against the White House itself. And I expect you'll be checking that out. We'll try and confirm that, but that's what AP is reporting right now. Again, this all began about an hour and 15 minutes ago here in Lower Manhattan when the first of two planes crashed in to the first of the two towers behind me at the World Trade Center, and you can see the smoke billowing out of the front tower now. And then about a half an hour later, just as emergency crews were converging on the scene, as eyewitnesses were gathering on the street corners, a second plane drove in too, and you can see that plane coming around the building right now in this tape, and there you can see the hit as it comes through what looked to me, at least, and this is the first time I've seen that tape, come through the back side of the tower. I guess that would be the south side of the tower, and then the smoke and flame coming out the front side. Again, that was about a half hour after the first attack, which was at about 8:45. Look, you want to be careful here. We don't want to get too far ahead of this, but obviously this has all the appearances of an extraordinarily well-coordinated and devastating terrorist attack here in the United States. Certainly nothing like it since Oklahoma City, and nothing like it here in New York since the terrorist attack on the same World Trade Center buildings in February of 1993. At the Pentagon, a plane or a helicopter has crashed, apparently as part of whatever this operation has been, and Jamie McIntyre is there. Jamie, what are you hearing?
Well, Aaron, there is a lot of confusion here at the Pentagon. It appears that something hit the Pentagon on the outside of the 5th corridor, on the Army corridor. Several Army officers I talked to reported hearing a big explosion, seeing shards of metal coming past their window. The Pentagon has been evacuated. Emergency services personnel were rushing to reports of several people trapped in the building. Most of the building's 24,000 people are outside of the building or in the center courtyard as emergency teams try to sort out what has happened here. There is, of course, thick black smoke billowing from the scene. There is a lot of confusion. The Defense Protective Service, which is the police force here in the Pentagon, has been urging people to get out of the building and move away from the scene so they can handle the emergency situation. Again, it appears that an aircraft of some sort did hit the side of the Pentagon, the west front, which faces sort of toward Arlington National Cemetery. It's a corridor where a lot of Army offices are located.
Wow.
And some people were...
Jamie, I need you to stop for a second. There has just been a huge explosion. We can see a billowing smoke rising, and I'll tell you that I can't see that second tower, but there was a cascade of sparks and fire, and now it looks almost like a mushroom cloud explosion, this huge billowing smoke in the second tower. This was the second of the two towers hit. And I cannot see behind that smoke, obviously, as you can either. The first tower in front has not changed, and we see this extraordinarily and frightening scene behind us of this second tower, now just encased in smoke. What is behind it, I cannot tell you. But just look at that. That is about as frightening a scene as you will ever see. Again, this is going on now in 2 cities. We have a report that there's a fire at the State Department as well, and that is being evacuated. So we've got fires at the Pentagon evacuated, the State Department evacuated, the White House evacuated on the basis of what the Secret Service describes as a credible terrorist threat. We have 2 explosions, 2 planes hitting the World Trade Center here in New York. And what this second explosion was that took place about a part of the south, that would be the South Tower, has apparently collapsed. We don't know if that was from the impact of this first plane that hit it or whether something else has happened there, and we'll work on that. Our Washington Bureau Chief, Frank Sesno, is on the phone. Frank, what are you hearing?
Aaron, I just drove past the Pentagon across the 14th Street Bridge, which is now choked with traffic. We're beginning to hear emergency sirens and rescue personnel fanning out across Washington. There is a gigantic black billowing cloud of smoke that is rising over the Pentagon. You heard Jamie McIntyre a moment ago describe where that was coming from. I can also tell you that local radio, in addition to talking about evacuations, as we've heard at the Pentagon, and the White House is reporting that the Capitol building has been evacuated and the Treasury Department has been evacuated. Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, is exceptionally tense and clearly taking steps as if it is virtually under siege here. We don't know specifically, as you've said, what has taken place at the Pentagon, but this is very serious, striking at the heart of the national government. And as John King was explaining, the White House
Frank, it's Aaron. I need to interrupt you for a second. Again, there has been a second explosion here in Manhattan at the Trade Center. We are getting reports that a part of the tower, the second tower, the one a bit further to the south of us, has collapsed. We are checking on that. We are also told that the Sears Tower in Chicago has been evacuated, and what I can't tell you on that is whether there was something specific that happened there, whether there was an attack on that building yet, we're checking that out, or whether there was a warning, whether there was a threat of some sort, or whether that is simply precautionary. What we can tell you is that just in the last several minutes here, 2 or 3 minutes, a second or third, I guess technically, extraordinary event has happened here in Lower Manhattan. You can see this extraordinary plume of smoke that is, or was at least, the second tower of the World Trade Center. Perhaps 3 or 4 minutes ago, you could, from where we were standing, see that second building that is just a bit to the south of the first building, but you can't see it anymore. It is covered with smoke. A large plume of smoke also coming still from the first tower, where the first plane hit at about 8:45. We can, by the way, if we can cue the tape, we can show you that second attack, or at least the second explosion in the Trade Center that occurred at about 9:15 Eastern Time. As you can imagine, there you can see to the right of your screen a plane coming in. We do have a report of a hijacked American Airlines plane. It comes into the south side, and then boom, you can see the fire coming out the front, or the north side of the building. I guess that'd be the northeast side of the building. And then just in the last several minutes, there has been a second explosion, or at least perhaps not an explosion, perhaps part of the building simply collapsed. And that's what we saw, and that's what we're looking at as smoke now just covers Lower Manhattan, almost as far to the end of Manhattan Island as you can get, is where the trade centers are. The Sears Tower in Chicago has been evacuated, and we continue to check on the circumstances there. The Pentagon, the State Department, and the White House have been evacuated in Washington as well. The president has... we can show you now what happened just a few moments ago at the Trade Center. Watch the building to the left, to the back of those two buildings. This is just a few minutes ago. We don't know if something happened, another explosion, or if the building was so weakened it just collapsed. But we have one of our producers on the phone, and I didn't get the name, so why don't we just go ahead? You there?
Yeah, this is Rose Arcee calling from New York.
Rose, tell me what you know.
Just a few minutes ago, we saw there's a portion of the building where the first plane struck that seemed to be buckling inside itself, almost as if the top of the building was going to fall. Shortly after that, two people, it's hard to tell whether they were being pushed or they physically approached themselves the sort of river side of the building, it would be the west side of the building, and appeared to jump from the top floors, just under where you're seeing the smoke and fire.
That is extraordinary. The South Tower, the World Trade Center, has collapsed. Again, tell me, how long ago was it that you saw this?
This must have been about 5 minutes ago, and prior to that, you could see heads popping out of windows right beneath where that big gaping hole is. So there appeared to be people alive right below where the crash point was, and were trying to find some way out of there. And just as the thing started to buckle, you saw them plummeting from that top floor.
Right, and perhaps this is stating the obvious. We apologize for that, but obviously people were already at work here at the Trade Center when this happened. We don't know how many people have been hurt in all of this. We have no idea at this point. As you look at an aerial shot coming from the, I guess that would be coming from the south of the Trade Center, or what is at least the Trade Center behind those huge plumes of smoke. All airports across the country, every airport in the United States has been shut down as the FAA and the government tries to figure out exactly what has happened, what is at risk, what is not, who is behind it. Are there more explosions, more attacks yet to come? Here in New York, the trading on the New York Stock Exchange has been suspended, at least for now. All bridges and tunnels coming into the city have been shut down as police try and clear the way. We can tell you, as we were coming in perhaps an hour ago, there was a convoy, I can't think of a better word, a convoy of fire and police trucks racing down the West Side Highway, and this is in the middle of rush hour. Obviously, every available fire unit here in Manhattan has been brought to the Trade Center. Outside the White House, John King, our senior White House correspondent. John.
Hello, Aaron. They have pushed us even further back away from the White House now, and there are more than a half dozen fire trucks, some of the Secret Service now patrolling the perimeter at Lafayette Park, which is directly across from the White House, have automatic rifles drawn to keep people away from the park, and they're policing back and forth. You can probably hear additional fire apparatus arriving on the scene. Senior White House staffers who were evacuated, all they can tell us is that they were told that there was a credible threat on the White House as well, and that they were told to evacuate the premises. What we do not know is whether or not the Vice President and the National Security Team have stayed inside the White House Situation Room. We know that they were directing and monitoring operations from there as of just about 15, 20 minutes ago. But the White House staff, the Executive Office Building staff, and all the office buildings around, including the Treasury Department and some government and some non-government office buildings, people have been evacuated out into the street. And again, the Secret Service now putting up yellow police line tape, and some of them patrolling Lafayette Park with automatic rifles, which is a scene quite extraordinary here across from the White House.
John, tell us as best you can what the government's national security apparatus will do right now. I mean, what do you guess is happening, and where is it happening?
Well, I don't want to guess at all, but from the White House Situation Room, a president or a vice president can direct a war, can direct a full-scale world war. The White House Situation Room is where all information, it is accessible to all information from the United States military, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, from the Federal Aviation Administration in this case. The White House Situation Room is prepared just for situations like this, unfortunately, to be prepared in a time of crisis for the president to monitor incoming information and to direct any U.S. military or non-military emergency response. The White House Situation Room is a bomb shelter, for that matter. That part of the White House is a bomb shelter. Whether or not they have stayed in there is unclear. We know in the past that would be the routine. We just do not have a direct answer as yet, because most of the staff, if not all of the staff, has been evacuated from the premises.
So I gather you're just not you're not able to get any calls into the building right now, or at least not getting them answered at this point.
Calls you get into the building are not answered at this point. And more fire apparatus showing up now as we speak. We saw most of the senior staff come out. We have not seen the national security staff that we would recognize anyway, but I should note there are other gates from the White House. We are on the north side, and this is
John, you're being drowned out by the sirens. Alan Dodds-Frank of our bureau here in New York joins us on the phone. Alan, where are you?
Hi, Aaron. Our colleague Jennifer Westhoven also just arrived. She was closer to the building. I'm just south of Canal Street, about 10 blocks north of World Trade Center. And just before 10 o'clock, parts of the building began peeling away. People started screaming. Jennifer tells me, because she was a little closer to the building, that the police began yelling, "Run, run," and thousands of people started running away from the buildings as they were falling. That was, of course, followed by a onrush of ambulances and special police vehicles. Some people have told us, although I can't confirm this, that dozens of stories of the building have fallen away, maybe down as low as the 30th floor.
Let's get him, Mike.
And again, just because we lost a little bit at the beginning, where are you physically now? This is
I'm just south of the Holland Tunnel in downtown Manhattan, perhaps 10 to 15 blocks north of the World Trade Center.
Got it. And the pictures that our viewers are looking at, this was that collapse of the South Tower.
Correct.
Just a few minutes ago here in New York.
Yes, and moments after that, people began running toward us. Jennifer Westhoven, who normally is at the stock exchange, was only about 5 blocks